I've read that you were trained by the Iron Sheik. Is there any truth to that?
There's a lot of truth to that, as a matter of fact, man. I was working in the Houston wrestling office when I was like, oh man, I had to be 16 and 17 years old. Actually, I worked there from the time I was 16 to 20 when I started wrestling. And there was a football player who wanted to learn how to wrestle in Houston because I think somebody told him he could make a lot of money and it wouldn't be so hard as football. And Gary Hart used to come in every Friday morning and go over the matches with Paul Bosch before the show, and then we'd go down and do the show Friday night. Well, the Iron Sheik was in the territory. He was wrestling as Muhammad Farouk. And since this football player wanted to train to be a wrestler, Paul Bosch set it up where Gary would bring the Sheik from Houston, or from Dallas to Houston, and come down in the afternoon, like noon, and the football player and I would go to the Coliseum with the Sheik and work out. The football player only lasted 2 weeks, and Khosrow came down a couple weeks after that. We trained maybe 2 months, Friday afternoon before the shows. And I always kept my gear in my trunk anyway because I wanted to wrestle, and Paul knew I wanted to wrestle, so I was ready for anything, man. But yeah, that's kind of what happened. After Sheik left the territory, I trained with Nick Kozak and Joe Mercer. So yeah, I trained with the Iron Sheik, man. He stretched the living shit out of me, man, a couple times. Slapped the dog shit out of me and stretched me. Wasn't a whole lot I could do about it, even if I wanted to.
What was his personality like in those years outside of the ring?
Yeah, well, the Iron Sheik wasn't so crazy then, or maybe he was still crazy, just didn't show the insanity that he does now, I guess. He was a great guy. He was a pretty serious guy. He was wrestling as Muhammad Farouk back then. It was a great crew, but his personality back then was a lot more serious, and I don't know how far gone he was. I mean, he was a pretty cool guy to me, with the exception of stretching me.
Right. Now, Steve Austin writes a lot in his book about how you helped him starting off. Do you have any memories of Steve Austin's early days in wrestling?
Yeah, man, I think Steve Austin was always going to be a star. Nobody could ever, I think, imagine what kind of star he was going to, how big a star he was going to be. But I do remember Steve being very ambitious. I remember Steve soaking everything in. And you hear that a lot, but what I mean is Steve would watch the matches, every match from start to finish, with the exception of the match he had to work, obviously. But yeah, I remember Steve as being very aware of what he wanted to do. He just had to find that vehicle to get there, and eventually he obviously did. So I had a lot of fun with Steve, man. We'd go to the gym. We used to I remember when a friend of ours left and went to Puerto Rico and left us his 1978 Tercel that had no air conditioning, and the radio was crap, and we go driving down the road to Evansville or Louisville, and with the windows down, our shirts off, Steve's hair blowing in the wind, my hair blowing, sweating, passing people going, yeah, look at us, we're big stars. But yeah, man, Steve was a cool guy back then. He's even cooler now. He's one of those guys that the only thing that changed was his destiny and his superstardom. It never went to his head, even today, I think.
Could you see the potential of him to be a superstar even in those days?
I could see a lot of potential in Steve in those days because he was relentless. He was relentless in the gym. He was relentless in learning. We had a conversation one time going down the road, Steve and Brian Lee, and I don't know what started it, but it came out we were talking about characters, and at that time he was stunning Steve Austin. And Brian Lee was called Primetime Brian Lee, and I guess there was Primetime Deion Sanders, and that's where Brian said he got the primetime from. And I asked him, I said, what is primetime? What is stunning Steve? Why are you stunning Steve? He's got that long, stringy blonde hair, the red Ric Flair robe, and the biker shorts with white boots. It just didn't ring true as stunning Steve. But he had potential. You saw it there. You couldn't help but see he looked great. He stayed in shape. He had a work ethic, too, which was really, really undeniable. He wouldn't ask anybody for money. He wouldn't ask for any help, per se, on that part. He would, You hear the stories about him buying a bag of potatoes to last him a week. He really did that. Potatoes and rice. We were living at a real shithole called the Congress Inn in Nashville, Tennessee, which if you didn't have a crackhead or crack pipe or syringe, they gave you one when you checked in. You know what I mean? It's that kind of shithole. It's a real crap place, but we saved money. It was like $50 a week, if that tells you anything. And that's where he lived because he was studying the game. He was a student of the game, and you couldn't help but see the potential. But I don't know that anybody back then would have said he's going to be the megastar he became.
And what's your opinion of Jim Cornette?
Jim Cornette gave me a break, and Jim Cornette is a very, very smart guy. I have all the respect and love, admiration for Jim Cornette. I can't say anything bad about Jim. He's always been more than fair with me. Gave me an opportunity when there wasn't any opportunities. So I have nothing but love and respect and admiration for Jim Cornette.
Do you have any interesting stories about him?
I have a lot of interesting stories. I don't know if I can tell publicly. I don't know if the statute of limitations will or not. You know what I'm saying, man? And that's the truth. I mean, Jim was an excitable guy, man. Jim could be, and let me say this, Jim's a very passionate guy, and he was rightfully so, because he demands perfection and he can lay out something. Jim was a guy that would write out 10-page finishes, 10-page matches. Now, and I'm not a guy that can remember anything. I mean, I had a lot of fun in the 80s and 90s and the 20s. Anyway, Jim used to write things out and have everything laid out just the way he wants it. And it was up to us to pull it off. So there was a time, and there's a lot of stories about Jim, but I don't think they're for public consumption. But there was a time when Johnson City, we had a match, and it was against the Rock and Roll Express, who we'd worked with forever and a long time, and it was a match. But Jim had an angle figured out for the match, and I was up in the seats studying. I was studying is what I was doing, and I was gone for about 15 minutes. When I came back down, Jim had destroyed his racket. He had thrown a fit because he couldn't find me. He wanted to go over the match. He wanted to go over the angle, and I was nowhere to be found. And he got hot. He got mad. He got over it, but I mean, rightfully so. He was that passionate. He had to go over it right then. He couldn't find me, and he was right to be mad. But again, I had to study for that science project I had going on.
Now, was it him that came up with the heavenly bodies, or was that you?
No, that was Jim. But I had been a part of the heavenly bodies before in Memphis with Pat Rhodes, and Bobby Fulton gave us that name in Memphis. So when Jim and Stan walked out of WCW, it was Jim's idea to call us the Heavenly Bodies, and that was from, I believe, Don and Al Green earlier days. But yeah, it was all Jim Cornette.
And so that started off with Stan Lane. How did it end up going from Stan Lane to Jimmy Del Rey?
Stan Lane was living in Charlotte, North Carolina at the time we got together, and this was right after the Midnight Express with Bobby Eaton and Stan and Jimmy. Had their run in WCW, and things just weren't going right, and Stan and Jimmy decided to walk out. The original plan was for Stan, Jimmy, and Bobby to walk out, and Jimmy was going to open up Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and going to have the Midnight Express rock and roll angle all over again. But Bobby was given a contract, had guaranteed money, he had a family, so Jimmy said, no, you stay, we'll leave. So Jim called me. At the time I was working in Memphis, Tennessee with the Jarretts, and said I have this opportunity and this is what we're going to do. Rick Rubin was the backer, the money guy, he was a silent partner. So it was great on paper. It was just the time that it was happening, the business was changing. But Stan was living in Charlotte at the time, and that's kind of a commute for the money we were guaranteed going to be making for that week. For him to make, and he had already been through that experimental time in his career, and he had been through that big run in WCW, and I just don't think his heart was in it as much to make those long shots and have to get a hotel and have to do what he had to do on that end of the territory. So Stan decided to quit, so that's it. And we were really in a bind. We didn't have anybody, there wasn't a whole lot of people out there to choose that could come in and be my partner. And I knew a lot of people, but they were all with WCW or WWE. So Jimmy Del Rey was in Florida, and Kevin Sullivan recommended him. Kevin Sullivan knew he was a great worker, a good guy, and Kevin kind of owed Jimmy a little bit. So we contacted Jimmy, and he came in. And a lot of people looked at him and said, no, don't think so. But once he came in and he started working and we found out he was a hell of a worker. And he really knew what he was doing in the ring. So that's kind of how that came about. And as we went on, we found out that he knew his stuff.
Now, I've read that you had a series of barbed wire matches as the Heavenly Bodies. Is that true?
Yeah, with the Fantastics, I believe it was.
What's your opinion on barbed wire matches in general, and do you think that in this day and age they should still be happening in wrestling?
I don't think in this day and age especially you should do barbed wire matches. You should do things that you don't need to use the blade these days, especially with what we know going forward and from back then, it's not necessary. You can still tell stories without doing the barbed wire. You can have cage matches, you can have gimmick matches, but barbed wire is dangerous, and I didn't really particularly want to get cut by it. So I don't see any room for it in today's world. I don't see any need for it. I can understand people's passion, or they want to see blood and guts. I understand that part of it, but it's not necessary to do it with barbed wire or anything like that.
What do you think of these companies like CZW that operate in like a field with no commission or anything really looking over them, and they're just performing stunts basically?
I never understood somebody taking a fluorescent light bulb and smashing over their head or their back. I never understood that. I never had a desire to do that. I don't necessarily agree with the commissions on one hand, but at the same time, the good part about commissions is they do keep people like that out. The ones who use light bulbs and tacks and whatever else they use,
Glass.
It makes no sense. You can get off on it, and it's a special breed that gets off on it, and that's cool. That's whatever you want to do. Not what I care to see, not what I want to do. I've seen them on YouTube, but I don't get the psychology. I don't get the reason why. It's one of those things where you can go and watch G.G. Allen, not anymore because he's dead, but that was the kind of stuff that those guys did. G.G. Allen and the Murder Junkies were just something you couldn't, it was like a car wreck. It was terrible, but you had to look, and then once you saw it, and you didn't want to see any more. The same thing with the CZW and the light bulbs and the barbed wire, things like that. I don't see a need for it. I don't see what attracts people to it, but to each his own, I guess.
And you feuded a lot, as you mentioned before, with the Rock and Roll Express as the Heavenly Bodies. Do you have any memories of those matches and stories about the Rock and Roll Express?
Well, here's the great thing about the Rock and Roll Express. They're the one tag team, the only tag team I can think of that's been together for over 30 years, and that's pretty amazing. That's a hell of a marriage, man, to go through life with, and especially in this business. Ricky was great to work with, so was Robert, and we had some really great matches. Individual stories, once again, I don't know that the statute of limitations are up on a lot of that shit, and I say that half jokingly and half not. We had a great time, but man, the thing about back then, and when you talk about rock and roll stars, and you talk about guys like Ricky and Robert, they were living the life of a rock and roll star everywhere they went. Even in Smoky Mountain, I gotta say this, they had their run in WCW, but in East Tennessee, that's kind of a special place too. They still remember the 70s. and the 80s, and even the friggin' 90s. So that was kind of cool because they had just come off that hot run, and rock and roll was still hot, man. And they still, Ricky to this day still works, and he's in his 60s, man. I don't know if that's sad or heroic. Maybe it's both. But I admire both of them, man. They were great workers, and they were always pros too.
And you had a unique situation when you first came to WWE. You were working in both Smoky Mountain and WWE. What are your memories of first coming into WWE, and how were you treated?
Well, when we first got to WWE, it was supposed to be a one-shot deal against the Steiner brothers at SummerSlam. And I was cool with that. But when we got there, it's kind of a tough deal when you have family working in a company, and especially in an entertainment company. We were treated okay. We were treated fairly. But once again, we weren't very confrontational. Jimmy Del Rey and myself weren't very confrontational. We were just happy to be somewhere. We were just happy to be there. It was originally supposed to be just SummerSlam, and then they brought us in, I think, for Survivor Series, and then we did another pay-per-view. And it wasn't until, I think, May of '94 when they offered us a contract. And the funny thing about that, and this is a line that helped me lose my job, but Vince McMahon, when he hired me, told me, "Tom, when I first met you, I thought you were a flaming fucking asshole." And what does that do to you, man? I just went, but I was a flaming fucking asshole when I first met Vince. But it was the circumstances, and that's the story for another day, I guess. And we got hired. But once we got hired, you know, I think we were maybe under a lot of scrutiny, possibly, and possibly not. But my opinion was we were under a lot of scrutiny, and it was up to us to speak up, and we didn't. We just pretty much did our job and thought that's what we were supposed to do. And not going to make waves, not going to cry and whine or say anything. But we got told, I think, the second TV we did, for full-time, somebody came to me and said, Pat Patterson wants to talk to you guys. And I'm thinking, man, he's going to tell us what a great match we had. Pat said, guys, what you did on TV, you just said, I'm up, it was nothing. And he went into detail about how horrible we were, and I thought, well, this is the shits. But I mean, you know, man, that was the way it was, and it was up to us to change it or speak up, and we did what we thought was right, but we wound up where we wound up, I guess. I have no complaints though, man. It was a great time.
And you ended up in that first run, I guess something happened with Jimmy Del Rey, and he left the company, and you ended up as Dr. X or something?
Yeah, well, what happened, Jimmy left, and there was that time where I was in limbo, and I was kind of working some shots for ECW and a couple other places, and then I got a call asking if I'd like to cut my hair, dye it blonde in a crew cut, and be Chris Candido's partner. And I said, absolutely not. I said, okay, cool. They hung up on me. I went, whoa, no discussion about this? Not going to try and talk me into it? Well, what happened was I called back and said, you know what, it's just hair, let's do it. All the while thinking, no man, I'll stick it out of it. And finally, the day came, flew to Hershey, Pennsylvania, I'll never forget this, and we waited all night long, and right before the show started, they said, all right, it's time to go. And they took me to the salon and they filmed the whole thing. Didn't show it on TV, they just filmed it for their collection. And we got the haircut, and I came back, and that's when I started becoming Chris's partner. Now, after Chris broke his neck, his body Donna's pretty much evaporated.
But you were tag team champions at one point.
Man, I'm telling you, it sounds like it was terrible, and it was terrible, it was a horrible gimmick. I have really no complaints. Looking back on it, we should have spoke up a lot more than we did. I should have spoke up a lot more than I did if I didn't like something. But I didn't want to be a crybaby, didn't want to be a whiner, just wanted to get along. You can't do that if you're going to be successful. You have to speak up. You have to have ways and learn how to manipulate to get your way. But we were tag team champions, and I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for everything I got. But it was after that when things happened with Chris. He broke his neck, and things were going the way they were going. They weren't going so great for any of us. And that's when I became a trainer and started putting on the mask, going on the road with guys like Mark Henry, Rock, Brockus, and some other guys too, man. I wore the mask and did what needed to be done.
What was the issue with Brockus? Seemed to have been a lot of hype into him. Nothing ever really came out of him.
No, I think he got 2 vignettes on TV, and then I'm not sure. And I went on the road with Brockus for about a month. I think it was a month straight. We did some pretty good weeks there, and he just never clicked. And then they sent him to Brett in Calgary, I believe, and Brett had a ring set up at his house, and they were trying to bring him along, but I think Brockus just never got the hang of it. He never grasped what he was supposed to grasp. So I mean, great guy, man. I had a lot of fun with him too. He knocked the dog shit out of me in the ring quite a few times, and I think he gave me a concussion once. But back in those days, we didn't have doctors, man, so I just knew since my head was hurting and I was throwing up, it probably was.
And what are your memories of training The Rock?
The Rock was always a cool guy. He was a smart ass, which is great, but he was a funny smart ass. He's not just a dick smart ass. He was a funny guy. And you knew The Rock had talent. He had the look. He had that charisma. He had that it factor. So, man, again, he's another guy. You knew he was going to be a big star, but you weren't sure how big. To even imagine that it could be as big as he is today, not just in the United States, but all over the world, was amazing. And the last time I talked to him was maybe 5 years ago now, I guess. And he was still the same guy. And just a very good, genuine person. That's the kind of guy he always was. So training with him was a pleasure. It was really, really cool.
What about training with Kurt Angle?
Oh, man. Well, Kurt Angle was another guy who just had it from the beginning. He, for an amateur wrestler to do what Kurt has been able to do is pretty amazing, because most amateur wrestlers have just the exact opposite in their bones. They're not supposed to be put on their back. They're not supposed to show pain. And Kurt pretty much took to it right away from the first time I locked up with him. I told him, I have nothing to prove to you, so please don't even try it. And he didn't, man. Kurt was great. Kurt was always a gentleman. And Kurt was a pro. He understood this was business. This isn't the toughest guy wins all the time. That this is business. And Kurt got that. Because if it was the toughest guy wins all the time, Kurt would probably win all the time.
And what do you think of the unfortunate problems he's had in recent years, health and legal?
Well, once again, this business can be really toxic at times. It can be toxic not just for your mind, body, and soul, but it can be toxic to everybody who comes around you. And unfortunately, that's what a lot of us, and I put myself in that same category, fall into. We get into a toxic behavior pattern, we get into a toxic lifestyle, and it just affects everything you do. And I'm glad Kurt has come out of that tailspin, because a lot of us don't, and some of us die, and some of us recover, and then some of us stay there until we do one or the other. So I feel empathy for Kurt, and I also feel glad that at least he's pulled himself out. Not everybody has that opportunity, and not everybody takes it.
And speaking of people that have had issues with that type of thing, what are your thoughts of Sunny in general? She obviously managed you, and she's had a well-documented series of issues over a number of years now.
Well, I'll say this. Sunny brings and has brought a lot on. Well, let me take it back, man. We all bring things on ourselves. Anything that happens to us, we brought it on. I really, really have to believe that. I'm responsible for me. You're responsible for you. Sunny's responsible for Sunny. She's had a lot of things happen through her life. But when we were together as a team and with Chris, she could be a pretty nasty person. Just not a nice person. I don't wish bad or harm or negativity towards anybody whatsoever. But you gotta believe sometimes karma does bite you in the ass. I don't like what's happened to Sonny. I don't think anybody should have to go through that. But if you've been to rehab more than 5 times, there is a little part in there where they talk about those poor unfortunate souls who just can't be saved. There is a part in there, man, because I know I've been 3. I get it. I understand. Sonny has to help Sonny. If it's got to be under supervision, she needs supervision, man. She needs help. She needs to go to meetings. She needs people around her. She needs a sponsor. She needs support. But you got to want it, and you have to want to do it, man. I feel bad for her, but at the same time, you get what you sow sometimes, man, and that's a bad thing. I don't wish her any harm, but you know what, man? She wasn't a very nice lady.
And you were talking earlier about Kevin Owens. Would you mind just telling us on camera what you think about Kevin Owens?
I didn't get Kevin Owens. When I first saw Kevin Owens, I didn't get it. I'd just seen a couple promos in Ring of Honor. And when I saw him against John Cena, or when I saw that he was going to face John Cena, I didn't get it. I saw his match in NXT when he wrestled CJ Parker. Okay, but it was a match to get him over, so he got over. Doesn't look like a typical star. Didn't see it. But once again, he did it. He worked with John Cena. There's only one. When you start with Cena, there's only one way to go after that, though. That's the problem. So I didn't get it. I flat out admit I didn't get Kevin Owens. I didn't understand the hype. Didn't understand what people were talking about. So yeah, I fully admit didn't get it.
Do you think a guy that looks like him, that wrestles in shorts and a t-shirt, could ever be the next Hulk Hogan or The Rock?
Well, let me ask you this, and this was said to me by someone much wiser than I. Name me any guy, any top guy, who got over wearing a shirt. Name him. Hulk Hogan didn't wear a shirt. Steamboat didn't wear a shirt. John Cena didn't wear a shirt when he wrestled. Name a top guy who got over wearing a shirt. I don't know. And that was said by somebody, again, much wiser than I.
And I'm just going to bring this up because you told me you were reading the book earlier. What do you think of the whole situation with Bruiser Brody's death and the fact that the guy, Jose Gonzalez, basically got away with murder and is still considered a star in Puerto Rico?
Well, let me say this. I remember when it happened and Sika came back to Alabama. It was in 88 or 87, I believe. It was 87 or 88. I'm not sure, but I just remember when Sika came back, and we were in Montgomery, Alabama, and Sika came back and told us what happened because he was there that night. I look around at what's happening today, where good is bad, bad is good. That's kind of what was happening then on that small island. Here was an undeniable murder. He murdered Bruiser Brody. Cut his guts out. Stabbed him. Whatever you want to say happened. It actually happened. How do you live with yourself on a daily basis? Reading the book, it talks about Jose's daughter died prior to that, and he was going through a lot of issues and wasn't mentally right, and Bruiser bullied him and made him look terrible in front of the guys in the dressing room and the crew. Okay? But is that a reason to murder somebody? No, not in my opinion. I wouldn't want to go to Puerto Rico. I never did go to Puerto Rico. I was never asked to go to Puerto Rico, just to clarify. I don't know how that happens unless you just have people in your pocket. And it's obviously they did. In the book, it talks about Barbara never got a notification when the trial was, and Atlas was never called. Dutch got his paper about coming after the trial was done. I thought it was bullshit myself. That's what I thought.
Do you think that his wife probably should have sued the company for letting that happen in their dressing room?
I would have thought, and I don't know if this happened, and I don't even remember if they talk about it in the book. I would have thought Carlos would have taken care of her somehow. But then again, Carlos had a business to run, and in the book, Terry Funk says, I don't know if he wouldn't have done the same thing if it was his territory. It's a small island, man. It's his livelihood. But here's your booker who just murdered your top star. And not forget wrestling, forget top star. He murdered somebody in the building, in the arena, in the stadium that you were working in the stadium you guys didn't. You ran the show anyway. I know the show must go on. And it wasn't an accident, though. This guy deliberately took a knife in the shower and cut Brody's guts out. How horrendous is that? So, could she have sued? Possibly. Would she have won? I doubt it with the way shit went down. Now, with the way it was, she would have gone back to Puerto Rico. I don't know that she really would have wanted to, man. I mean, she had a lot of shit going on in her life. She had her son. I don't know that she would have wanted to pursue that, paid a lawyer to do it, and have to deal with the Puerto Ricans again.
And did you ever meet Brody in your younger days?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I sure did, man. In Texas, when I first started out, and we'd go to Dallas with Mark Lewin, Brody and some friends would pick us up. We'd go to the Sportatorium. I knew Brody pretty good. Yeah.
And one final question here. What is your opinion of TNA, and are you surprised that they are still in business?
I'm extremely surprised they're in business. I'm surprised they lasted 10 years. I'm surprised they lasted 10 minutes, quite honestly. I'm glad it was a company out there that was a place for the boys to go. But their business plan, I never understood, just running pay-per-views in the beginning. And I just didn't see how they were throwing all this money away, how they were going to last. But I am surprised they're still there. I'm surprised they're still able to make payoffs or paydays if they are.
Do you understand how they can have late payments and things like this that we keep hearing about when the owner of the company is supposedly a millionaire?
Yeah. See, there's no such thing as a bottomless pit. There's no such thing, man. You can have $1 billion, but if you don't make money, and you just money keeps going out and nothing comes in, man, I promise you that it doesn't magically grow back. There's no such thing. So, yeah, I've heard about the millionaire, billionaire, and the power company and all that great stuff. I fully understand they have a money guy, okay, and it's her dad. But eventually, you reach that point. I don't know how much they've lost, but let's just say $10 million. If you have $100 million and you lose $10 million, to us, we're thinking, well, hell, you still have $90 million. To this guy, he's not looking at that. He's looking at the fact that he's lost $10 million. So, yeah, money doesn't just grow back. You have to have some come in. It can't all go out because it will dry up.
And now that I think of it just in a related question, do you think Global Force Wrestling has any potential, or will it just be another TNA if they can ever even secure a TV deal?
Well, I think Global Force Wrestling doesn't have a TV deal as we're sitting here talking today. They have an idea and they have a business plan. Whether it's sustainable in this climate of what the business has become today, because you have NXT going on the road, you have NXT and the WWE Network pretty much getting a buzz and being talked about, then more power to it. Once again, you have to have the talent, and that's where I see the major problem is. The biggest issue to me, where are they going to get their talent? Where's it going to come? Where's their Hulk Hogan? Where's their Cena's? Where's their Brock Lesnar's? I don't see anybody out there to fulfill those spots in that company. I mean, I'd like to see them succeed because, once again, it'll be a place for everybody to go. For the other guys to go, can't go to WWE. And I like the Bullet Club. I like what they're doing. And that's a place for them to go when they're not in Japan. But I don't know how that's going to sustain without finding some big stars and some attraction.